Welcome to PhD with Women on It. Hack the Future. My name is, well, clearly it's not Beata Young. I'm terribly sorry. Beata is still unwell. The good news is she's going to make a complete recovery. She is in hospital at the moment, just so that I'm clear with all of the group. And thank you to all the people who've been sending us love over the course of the last week. It has been a difficult time, but Beata is going to return, which is good news for you because I'm sure you don't want to see me presenting this show. You want to get Beata's energy. Well, in an attempt to give you a little bit more, or a little bit less mansplaining energy for today, I'm delighted to say we've got the incredible Jamil Navarroza from our team is going to be joining us to co-present. Today's PhD, Positivity Hack Delivered, will be given by our guest, Allegra Houston. Let me remind you, ahead of our wonderful topic today, right? What you don't know. This is a grassroots community. It focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men. I suppose that includes me as well. I bring heart to that hustle, and I really do bring heart to that hustle, ladies, gentlemen, whoever, wherever you are in the world, because empathy is my mojo, and empathy is critical when you write what you don't know. Now let's talk about some of the incredible things that ladies have been doing around the world in the course of the last week. Cheers, congratulations to Latifa Saleh Al-Shehi for receiving the Women in Tech Excellent Award and speaking at MicroStrategy World Dubai on AI and data. Love to see those ladies talking about AI because we know what's the biggest problem with AI right now. It happens to be a little bit sexist. Sasha Besuhanova, congratulations. You won a Woman in Tech Global Lifetime Achievement Award in Paris during the course of the past week. We're wishing you continued success and much, 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 much more lifetime in order to manage to get more done as a woman in technology. And third, but by no means least today, congratulations to Audrey Plonk for winning the Tech Diplomacy Award from Women in Tech Global. We wish you all the very, very best, and congratulations on being so diplomatic. With all those men in the room, it can sometimes be a major league challenge. So here we are with our wonderful guest today, Allegra Houston. The topic is her book, Write What You Don't Know, 10 Steps to Writing with Confidence, Energy, and Flow. Oh, sign me up. Yes, please. Allegra, greetings. Welcome to Positivity Hack Delivered. Where in the world are you today?
I am in northern New Mexico in the very beautiful community of Taos.
How fabulous. Northern New Mexico. You're certainly the first person who's managed to come to us from that incredible and amazing state. So tell me, I mean, if you don't mind my asking, how did you get to New Mexico?
Oh, it's kind of a long story. I don't think you want the whole story. I was living in London. I was actually born in London. I spent my childhood in a number of different places. And my brother was living here. I, at that time, thought I could be a film producer, not quite realizing that I didn't have three of the major qualifications to be a film producer. In other words, being good at asking for money, liking to argue, and having a private income. So as it turned out, I couldn't be a film producer, but at the time I thought I could. And my brother, Tony, who's an Oscar-nominated screenwriter, had a script that I loved and wanted to produce. And I came here for, as I thought, 6 months to work with him on it and never left. New Mexico, the state slogan is Land of Enchantment. But the joke is that it's the land of entrapment because so many people come here and just can't bear to leave.
But on the other hand, as entrapments go, it's a pretty gorgeously gilded entrapment.
Oh, yeah, it's the best entrapment I could imagine. I've lived here for 26 years now, and I have no intention of moving.
So fascinating. You've no intention of moving. And tell us, was it the confines of New Mexico that inspired you to write your book or something else?
Well, I met my creative collaborator here. His name is James Nave. So there's another example of a man helping a woman, or the two of us, we do it together. We're 50-50. He's not helping me. We're both, helping each other. 26 years ago when I moved here, and he at that time was working with Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way. Many of the people watching probably know that book. It's a classic. And Nave and Julia were producing Artist's Way creativity camps. And then for one reason or another, those finished. And he asked me to start teaching writing workshops with him. My background is I used to be a publisher. I was editorial director of a major company in London. And so I said yes, even though I actually didn't really know very much about writing. I knew about editing. But over the course of those, 15 years, let's say, I learned how to get out of my own way. I learned how to get out of my own head. And it was Nave's teaching that enabled me to write the memoir that was published in 2009, which is called Love Child, a memoir of family lost and found. And the experience of writing that memoir, the experience of teaching writing workshops, of writing the novel that I wrote after that, which is called A Stolen Summer, has led us to understand that we do have a method. And it's a really easy, fun method that works for absolutely everyone. And I can say this after having taught writing workshops for 20 years. There is nobody who has yet failed to write something that has originality, authenticity, emotional power, and that is satisfying to them. I'm not saying everybody can write a great novel or a great poem or whatever, but everybody can write a great something. And I think this is more important. When we started working on Write What You Don't Know, which was a sort of pandemic project, because we were in the same pod living next door to each other, we thought of it as a way to help writers write better, because this was the method that helped me write better. Despite my background, all of my critical judgment skills were no use when I actually started to try to be creative myself. So it was a method that helped me write better when I was working on Love Child and my novel, A Stolen Summer. But in the last 3.5 years, as we've been putting this out there, we've realized it's not just about for writers. It really is for everybody, because what happens when you write what you don't know is that you're exploring into your imaginative intelligence. And this is something that is important for business people, for scientists, and even the writing part is also important for business people, because let's say you have a startup, you're an entrepreneur, you need to be able to convey your passion for this idea. How do you do that? Not by sitting down at a computer and going, okay, I need to convey my passion for this idea, and you kind of seize up. Or not by saying, hey, ChatGPT, give me something about this, because by definition, it won't be very original and it won't be connected to you. So to have a really easy, fun technique that helps you write with your own originality, your own passion, your own view of the world is something that I think is valuable for everybody, as well as a creative outlet that basically improves the quality of your life and expands your creative range as a human being.
So expanding your creative range as a human being, it's absolutely fascinating, Angelica. And let me also say the Allegra, I'm so sorry, I'm mixing my Houstons up. I knew that would probably happen some stage.
It happens all the time.
I'm sure it happens all the time, yes.
I can't tell you how satisfying it is when somebody calls my sister Angelica Allegra. It does happen, very occasionally.
There you go. Yes, I'm so sorry. I do apologize for that. Thank you very much, those who've already sent us love today. This is a fascinating topic altogether, Write What You Don't Know with Allegra Houston. So Allegra, I mean, you've just mentioned, for example, the case of someone who is passionate about their startup and they've got to write and they've got to communicate and so on. When you say write what you don't know, I'm thinking, I suppose I end up thinking Donald Rumsfeld here, Rumsfeld's rules of unknown unknowns and known knowns and things like that. Maybe you can give us a little color on just how much we shouldn't know before we start writing about it.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. And actually, not personally much of a fan of Donald Rumsfeld, but I think he got a bit of a hard ride on that one, because I think he was actually correct. The known knowns, the unknown knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. All of those things actually are correct. Those exist. And what we mean by write what you don't know is not write from ignorance. So write what you know is a kind of classic piece of writer advice. It's attributed to Hemingway, it's attributed to Mark Twain, whoever, it doesn't really matter. But it only takes you so far, because if you ever sat down to write what you know, you realize that things don't come out the way they sounded in your head. They sound really good in your head, but when they get on the page, they're kind of flat or lifeless, or they feel kind of secondhand retreads. The whole thing is just a chore. So when we say write what you don't know, as I say, we don't mean write from ignorance. If you're going to write about IT or rocket science or horses, and you don't know anything about those subjects, do a bit of research. Write what you don't know means that not pre-thinking what you're going to write. In other words, not kind of knowing it in your head and then trying to download it. Coming to the page with curiosity rather than specific agenda and specific phrases. And there are a number of reasons why this works, because when you read something that's really original, you go, oh my God, how did they think of that? And the answer is they didn't think of it. It was given to them like a gift by their imagination, because that's how the imagination works. But in order to receive a gift, you have to be standing there with your, try and get those into the screen, with your hands open to receive it. So the imaginative storm method helps you get into that place where you are asking your imagination to give you those gifts, to write something that you haven't thought of before, that you haven't read before, that is not just like something you think is good writing or good copy for, a proposal, a funding proposal or whatever. So when you write what you don't know, you're curious. When you're curious, you can't be critical. So it's also one of the great ways of making your inner critic shut up. And when you're curious, you're also motivated, because curiosity is fun. Discovering things is fun. So you also get that advantage. You also never get writer's block because you're writing what you don't know. So you're not trying to get something down and feeling like you're a failure and you're not a good writer and you can't write this. And, oh no, I've got a deadline tomorrow. I've got to get something out. So we work in sort of 10-minute bursts. So it's also not like super time consuming or straining or stressful. So the writing what you don't know aspect, it takes a lot of the pressure off. It enables you to come up with those things that surprise you. And when you surprise yourself as you're writing, you surprise your reader as they're reading. There's a quote that I love from the poet Robert Frost, who said, "No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader." And that is so true. So if you're not surprising yourself, if it's a chore, if you're writing what you know and you're feeling like it's a chore, that chore energy is somehow there in the writing, and you're not going to excite the person that you want to be excited about your idea.
And it's so interesting because, well, obviously you've got a publishing background, so you've worked with a lot of different authors over the years, which must be both fascinating, frustrating, and every other possible emotion in between. But at the same time, what intrigues me about book writing is reading about how people write books. So for the record, I've written 10 books, and I'll happily send any one of them, because they're all specialities about financial technology and the world of exchanges, and your insomnia will be cured. But the thing's interesting. Oh, great line, actually. My mother said of my first book, I picked it up and I read it from cover to cover. It's fantastic. I didn't understand a word, but it's fantastic. I didn't put that on the endorsements subsequently, although I was tempted. So the thing that's interesting about what you're saying, Allegra, is that essentially you come with some kind of a game plan, but you're not actually sitting there expecting to watch where the ball's going to go every second of the entire game, for want of a better analogy. You're going to come with an overarching idea of somewhere you're going to start, somewhere you're going to get to, and probably you may even have some points in the middle where you think I'm going to try and sort of collate in the middle, but you just essentially let yourself create that book or create that piece.
I would say you don't even necessarily have to come with all of that.
Okay.
But your analogy to like watching the ball all the time is actually a pretty good one. I watch a lot of English Premier League football. That's my kind of go-to relaxation at the end of the day. And you're always hearing the commentators say, oh, there's a lack of creativity there. Oh, isn't he great? He's so creative. And that kind of creativity, that's legit. Creativity is doing something that's unexpected, surprising yourself, doing it differently. So even as a football player, creativity is a very important skill. So yes, you have set plays, but you have to decide when you're going to use them and all of that kind of stuff. But when there's a difference between sitting down to write and sitting down to write a book. So One of the things that we do in the Imaginative Storm is we have a prompt of the week on Zoom. Actually, it's now twice a week because we were getting a bit maxed out on Saturdays. So it's on Saturday at noon Eastern time, which I think would probably be 6 p.m. Malta time. And it's Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, which would be midnight Malta time. It's free. People Zoom in from all over the world. We have a woman in Tokyo, a guy in Sydney. They like the Thursday one because it's the next morning for them. A guy in South Africa, a guy in Rwanda who often Zooms in. It's very global. And that's free. And there we write without agenda completely. We just offer a writing prompt. Everybody makes a list of words. We share words. We write for 10 minutes. We read what we wrote. So that's kind of like, kind of going to yoga class for writers, but without the yoga, right? Is practice. But that practice is so freeing because you start to understand what it feels like to write what you don't know, to write without agenda, to just let your imagination do whatever it wants to do and surprise you. So that is actually really good training for when you sit down to write something a little more serious, which in my case, I'm doing every week because I write a Substack newsletter, imaginativestorm.substack.com. But that freedom in writing has been hugely helpful to me because my background is so critical. I have a first in English from Oxford. I was editorial director of a publishing company. I worked with Booker Prize winners. I worked with Nobel Prize winners. So it's all been very much about standards and about getting it right. But that doesn't help you when you sit down to write, because if you're trying to get it right, if you're trying to write well, that's almost a guarantee that you won't write well, because you'll be writing like writing that you read by somebody else that you thought was written well. So of course it doesn't sound like you, right? So that is one way to sit down and write what you don't know, to simply train your imagination to be free, to, move around and play, because that's what your imagination likes to do. And those playful aspects of imaginative intelligence are what gives your writing originality and energy, verve, and so on. When you're sitting down to write a book, I think it's helpful to know either the beginning or the end, but you don't have to know both. When I wrote Love Child, I didn't know I didn't know where the beginning was. I didn't know where my story started. I knew where it ended. But it took me a long time of generating material and playing around with what I had to discover where the beginning was. When I wrote my novel, I kind of knew where the beginning was, but the end, as it ended up to be, was different from what I originally thought it was going to be. So there is so writing a book is obviously a much bigger process. So you approach it in a different way, but still that sense of not knowing, not having to know, not being stuck to an outline. And, is for me very helpful. I mean, people's minds work differently. Outlines work for some people. It gives them a sense of security, of safety, gives them something to hold on to. And I find that's usually more the kind of right brain people, the more artsy, creative, disorganized people like to have an outline. But people like me, who are the more left brain people, the more kind of, the more organized, the more judgmental, the more, rational mind focused, it really helps us not to have an outline, to have that freedom to begin with. You're like, oh my God, how can I do this? But it's really easy. And it's the results basically are so much better. I know this from, as I say, teaching writing workshops for over 20 years, and I teach a specific memoir workshop annually for 5 days in Nova Scotia. So I just came back from that a couple of weeks ago. And the freedom that there were two people who had been working with an outline and it wasn't working for them, but they didn't know why their book was kind of lifeless and flat and wasn't kind of holding together, even though they could write really well. One of them had an MFA. And when I said, well, wait a minute, why don't we just get rid of this idea of what you think the book should be about and let the book itself tell you what it's about? They were like, oh, great. And it can be this and it can be that. And oh, maybe it ends here. And I think it starts there. And suddenly you're motivated, you're creative, you're excited. And all of that kind of struggle and angst and, self-doubt can just, be quietened.
So yes, I mean it's a fabulous concept. You're trying to quieten your mind to allow the turmoil of day to day and the turmoil of over planning stopping you from your creativity,
Right.
essentially. And it's that difference between workaday, as you say, I mean, something that looks like ChatGPT might have generated it to something that really has a soul and a life, and hopefully is going to take artificial intelligence a while to catch up with humanity on.
We
When
hope.
you're, yeah, we hope we live in hope. When you're doing that, I mean, in the process, you mentioned the fact that you've got these 10 steps. So, how did you manage to come up with these steps? Where did they come from?
Well, I mean, to be honest, they're not really steps. They're sessions. In Write What You Don't Know, the book, which is available as a book, an ebook. It's also an audio course, which I think is like the best way to do it, and a video course too, if you want to actually have to look at me and Nave the entire time, which you can do rather than listening to us. But the audio course is available like on whatever podcast platform you use, so it's just really portable and easy. Anyway, point being, it has 10 sessions, plus a welcome session that teaches you, or explains the imaginative storm method, explains how we're going to go about this. And then there's a kind of goodbye session at the end. The 10 sessions cover what we consider to be the major aspects of writing a story. So that may not necessarily be relevant for what, you're doing if you're writing let's say a grant proposal. On the other hand, it might be, because often when you write a grant proposal, you want a little bit of your history, a little bit of how this idea came to be, where it came from, what your background is. So the 10 sessions are, the first one is really about sort of how to spark your imaginative intelligence. The second session is more about how to let your voice come out. Then the third session is about bodily senses. Then there's a session about location. There's sessions about social life and nature and character and memoir and narrative and contradictions and paradoxes. I think I've covered them all because there's 2 about character. So that's what they're not really steps. They're steps to writing a book, perhaps, but they're engaged in sessions. There aren't 10 steps to learning how to work in the imaginative storm. There's really only a few: pen and paper, 10-minute timer, let your imagination take the lead. That kind of covers it.
Okay, so actually, let me ask you about that, because I'm very interested in this 10-minute timer. So it's a kind of a Pomodoro technique or something for writers. So what's the idea? The Pomodoro technique is something very similar. It's a way you study and you set your timer for, I think, 10 or 15 minutes, and then you study for 10 or 15 minutes, and then you stop and, I don't know, you look out the window or something. You probably, because it's oriented towards students, they watch one video on TikTok or something like that. But I'm not quite sure, but I know Pomodoro exists. So how does your technique work with this sort of 10-minute stint?
Well, I think it's the best hack I've ever learned for writing something. It seems like it's really restrictive and pressurized because it's 10 minutes, but it's actually the opposite of pressurized, because what you're doing is taking the pressure off yourself to write well. How can you possibly write something good in 10 minutes? It sounds completely ridiculous. So that's no longer the goal. The goal is just to surprise yourself. And for 10 minutes, you can do that. Basically, I think there are 2 intelligences that we're kind of dealing with here. There's a rational intelligence and an imaginative intelligence. The rational intelligence likes control. It likes judgment. It's time aware. It's pressurized. It has, angst and worry and stress and all of those things. The imaginative intelligence basically just likes to play. It likes to be creative. And what is creativity? Creativity is making new arrangements of things that haven't happened before. That's what we call creativity. And your imaginative intelligence can draw on everything that's ever happened to you in your life. Some of it is, available to your rational, your conscious mind, but other memories are kind of sublimated. They're lost. You store information in your body as well. So you're asking for those 10 minutes. You're asking your imaginative intelligence to take the lead. Now, I said your rational mind likes control, but it'll give it up for 10 minutes.
Right.
It's like, okay, fine. The imaginative intelligence is not going to kind of go crazy and wreck the house. I'm not going to go crazy. It'll be fine. Just 10 minutes. I can do that. I can let go for 10 minutes. So that's another advantage of the 10 minutes. I don't find that 15 or 20 minutes works as well, because it kind of gives you time to think about, well, what should I write? Oh my God, am I doing this right? No, maybe I started in the wrong place. Maybe I should start somewhere else. And you kind of get back into that rational mind tangle of trying to do it well. The goal is to not try and do it well, because doing it well is something you already know. The goal is to surprise yourself, and you won't know until later whether you did it well or not. So there's no point thinking about it right now. So that's where the 10 minutes really helps you. It takes all that rational mind, anxiety and stress and ambition and judgment out of the picture and just gives you 10 minutes for your imagination to play, to make new connections, to surprise you, and to come up with something that's authentically you.
So that's really fascinating. So it's a way of taking off the stress and so on. Let me ask, I mean, just because I'm a man and therefore I was interested in the engineering niceties and minutiae of these things, what do you do at the end of the 10 minutes? Presumably, if you're still writing really well, you can just carry on until you stop.
Yeah.
Or if you want to, do you stop after 10 minutes, take a break? Or if you feel good, you can reset for another 10 minutes? It
obviously depends on the situation you're writing in. If you're on our prompt of the week session, everybody stops after 10 minutes and we break up into Zoom rooms and everybody reads what they wrote to an appreciative audience of 5 or 6 people, because there's no point in not being appreciative. You only wrote it in 10 minutes. So criticism is absurd. If you're working on, let's say, a book or, something for your business, yes, if things are going great when the timer pings, of course, keep going. But the wonderful thing is, if things aren't going great, you can go, oh, thank God, I don't have to do that anymore. If you're working on a book, let's say, okay, I'm going to forget about that scene. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to write about something that happened 10 years apart from that and just start afresh. So it gives you permission to not keep trying on something that just, for whatever reason, isn't sparking today. You can get up and take a break and make another cup of tea, or you can just carry straight on, whatever you like. But that permission to not have to keep struggling on something that isn't going is, I found, again, massively useful. Because before that, if I was trying to write, a particular scene, or I was trying to write about, my crazy Italian grandfather who stood on the roof on his head all day long with almost no clothes on, singing, "Oh, what a beautiful morning." Okay, this is pretty good subject matter, right? But the first time I sat down to write about him, it just felt so kind of tired and didn't go. And I was struggling and working, trying to get it to go. And I was just bored with what I was writing. And then I realized, oh, great. Why don't I just stop and write about something completely different? And that was just such a release. And it's, again, good for the morale, good for the motivation, good for the energy level, both of you and of your writing.
Yes, and I think you hit on a very interesting thing, because one intriguing part for me has been reading about how writers write, and particularly book writers. And it always quite fascinates me, these book writers who sit down and go, so I sit down at X o'clock in the morning and I write 500 words and then I stop and then I go and do something else. Because I'm clearly not in their league, because I have no idea how you do that.
I'm not a league. Exactly. That's not a league. That's just a different way of working. I want to stop that right there. It's not better.
It's not better. I mean, but the thing is, it's so interesting, because when you're younger, you read this stuff and you think, oh, that must be the way I have to do it. And then sort of 5 or 10 years later, I'm thinking, that just does not work for me. I mean, some days I can write 100 words. Sometimes, I mean, I have been known to write not hugely needing an enormous amount of editing, 10,000 words in a day. I mean, I can't actually talk by the end of it, but it's just because it just all comes out of the brain, and no one can interrupt me, and I'm like something out of a Mila Jovovich zombie movie. But it is so interesting, because you're saying to get the creative juices together. Now, what I really want to ask you, though, is you started in a major publishing company. You worked in London in, if I may say so, kind of the heyday of London publishing, or at least, I mean, these days, I think things aren't quite so good because of the digital world. But on the other hand, it has its podcast and live stream upsides. How did you manage to make that transition over time from being a very, healthily salaried person with a sound job to being where you are now, to, waking up in the morning and sort of thinking, shall I sharpen the spear and go out and hunt something in the New Mexico Badlands in order to eat? Or am I going to be able to actually write enough to make a living, create my courses, etc.?
Well, moderately healthily salaried. Publishing was never famous for the size of its salaries.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But it was a salary. So, it was actually money coming in every month. So that was certainly convenient. Well, there are a couple of questions there. The first one is I want to answer is how did I change from being a kind of publisher mind to writer mind? Because like you, I thought there was a way to be a writer. I thought there was a way to do it. And as a kid, I actually never really liked writing. It bored me because I used to have to write thank you letters, and I had to write those kind of stupid what I did over my school vacation essays, which was completely boring. So I always found writing itself rather boring because I didn't know there was a different way to write. And I liked the idea of being a writer because I could live anywhere in the world as I thought. I mean, you can do that now anyway, but back then, before the internet, that wasn't so obvious. So even though I was a publisher and worked with all these really good writers, I didn't actually know how they wrote, because what came to me was a fairly finished draft. And yes, there might be ways in which I could help them make it better to a greater or a lesser degree. But I really did think that you sat down and started at the beginning, and then eventually you ended up at the end. I didn't know that you could write out of order. I didn't know that you didn't have to know all of what your book was before you sat down, or even all of what your chapter was, or even all of what that particular scene was before you sat down. I didn't know any of this stuff. I had to find all of that out for myself. So that's one way. And, there's a quote from Barbara Kingsolver, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist. I have to write 300 pages before I get to page 1. Okay. What are those 300 pages? I don't know. Are they backstory? Maybe some of them will come in later. Maybe they're just, stuff she has to kind of get out of her system before she actually gets to the story. Who knows what those 300 pages are, but point being, she doesn't start at page 1. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there is no single way to write. Then to answer your other question, how did I go from having a salary to having to sharpen my spear and try and go out and get some venison around here? There are a lot of deer.
Yeah.
I had some usable freelance skills. I can copy edit, I can proofread, I can write stuff to order. So I could write. I started writing kind of magazine articles. So those were a little more creative. I did interviews with people, which were a bit more like writing to order. And then I did some more creative ones. So I had a way to support myself freelance. I could consult on screenplays for a development and production company, distribution and production company. So yeah, I just, kind of put it together bit by bit as a freelancer, because I just basically couldn't face working in an office anymore. I felt like I'd sold my life away, and I wasn't good at working in an office. I mean, I could, but I'm not an early person. I could never get there at 9:30. But more than that, I'm not good at like office politics and schmoozing and all that kind of stuff. So I was a really good editor, but I was not a really good publisher, because I wasn't good at getting the marketing budget for my titles. I wasn't good at schmoozing the agents and the literary editors of newspapers and so on. So, and those are talents you need to be a good publisher as opposed to an editor. So I was in the wrong place. I had to get into a place where I was playing to my strengths, and not attempting to overcome my weaknesses most of the time.
Fabulous. So I've got to ask you one question, and then we're going to hand over to Jamil, who's going to make her debut asking the questions. Tell me one thing, Allegra. In this day and age, there are lots of people are publishing their own work, etc. Where do you sit on the divide? Are you still working with an old line publisher, or do you publish your own material?
Both. I'm still paying my bills with a bit of freelance work, and for that I work mostly for W.W. Norton, who are a big publisher in New York. So I do a lot of books with them, and that's how I've worked with the Pulitzer Prize. No, not the Pulitzer Prize, the Nobel Prize winners. They've both been Norton authors. But having published my memoir and my novel with major publishers, when it came to the books that we have written for writers, the first 2 books of those were How to Edit and Be Edited and How to Read for an Audience. Me and my creative collaborator, James Nave, we published those ourselves. And then we wrote Write What You Don't Know. And we decided to publish that ourselves too. There was just no reason to go through all the palaver of trying to find a publisher and being out of control of how the book was eventually going to look. And publishers expect you to do your own marketing anyway. So I know how to put a book together. I can do all of that stuff. And if the publishers aren't going to do the marketing for me, what advantage do they bring to me for a book like Write What You Don't Know? So I've published now 4 books myself, those 3 that I mentioned, and also in that series of How to Edit and Be Edited, How to Read for an Audience. The tagline for those is the stuff nobody teaches you. We also have an excellent book on how to make a speech, which is written by a woman who coaches people on how to make speeches and runs probably one of the strongest TEDx's in the country.
Fantastic. And I'm with you there on the merits if you actually understand what you're doing in terms of publishing your own book by yourself, because you've also got the speed to market and the ability to be a lot more flexible, which is something that established publishers don't make. I actually find it funny. I got to say a little anecdote. I wrote the first best-selling book, not Barbara Clarkson best-selling, but the first best-selling book about financial technology in the world. And I found it absolutely hilarious that it had to go through the most regressively analog process with, I won't mention them in public, but one of the biggest publishers in the financial markets, and it was painful how long everything took. Anyway, we're much more low latency here. It has been my joy to present this segment. I'm going to come back at the end of the show. Now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your love. And I really want the community to support my co-presenter today, because Jamil Navarroza, she's stepping in on behalf of Beata, who's ill, and she's going to pick up the cudgels and start talking to our brilliant guest, Allegra Houston, all about Write What You Don't Know. Jamil, over to you.
Hello, Patrick, and hello, Allegra.
Hi, Jamil.
I just want to say, the experience, ideas, and creativity are valuable in tech world. So, by embracing the power of the imagination and intuition, it can not only overcome the challenges, but also innovate and lead. So, I just want to say to the those who are watching, so let your imagination run wild and let your voice be heard. So now it's time for our usual questions, Allegra. What advice would you give to females to help their career or start an entrepreneurial journey?
Well, I would say the most important thing is to know what you're good at and know what you're just not that good at. We all have a different skill set. And it's important to be playing to your strengths most of the time, rather than having to overcome your weaknesses. And that was my problem when I was a publisher, when I worked in an office. Most of the time, I felt that I was having to be good at something that I wasn't particularly good at. And the actual editing was kind of taking a back seat. I was taking work home and doing that on weekends. And the office-y stuff was really the stuff I'm just not that good at. So I would say, don't feel that you're supposed to be good at things that you're not particularly good at. Be competent if you can at them. I don't think it's okay to just go, oh, well, I can't do that at all. That's not necessary. But you need to find a place to work, a way of working in which your strengths are in the foremost, because that way you feel good about yourself. You feel confident. And if you're not confident because you're, mostly having to try and overcome weaknesses, if you're not confident, other people will catch up on that lack of confidence and they won't trust you either. If you don't trust yourself to be good at something, other people won't trust you to be good at something. Or if they do, then, you're in trouble. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is just don't take things personally. I think we're all kind of very inclined to think, oh, so-and-so's, so-and-so was mean to me, they don't like me, or they don't think I'm very good, or something like that. Maybe their cat just died. Maybe they're worried about their kid. Maybe it's nothing to do with you at all. So I think always, if you cannot take something personally, very often that's actually accurate. And even if it was personal, it will still help you not to be reactive. So don't be reactive. Calm is important. we're still, as women, having to fight this idea that women are so emotional and so hysterical and all that kind of bollocks. So, even though it's a drag to have to deal with those kind of prejudices, I think it's also smart not to play into them.
What about the top 3 soft skills all career-driven females, in your opinion, should have?
Sorry, I'm going to have to look at my list. I think I made some notes. The top 3 soft skills. Well, again, I would say emotional intelligence for yourself and for other people. And that's very much, emotional intelligence is what enables you to not take things personally and not be reactive. So I think that's a very important skill. And it kind of leads into everything else, to be diplomatic is important. And I would also just to say, to be reliable, if you say you're going to do something, do it. If you say you're going to be there at 10 o'clock, be there at 10 o'clock. Don't be there at 10:03 or 10:05. Don't say, oh, I had a headache. I'll give it to you tomorrow if you said I'm going to give it to you today. So I think, keeping your word, being reliable is really important.
It's just like the writer needs to tap into their imagination, and women needs to tap into their potential. So, what is your strategy for problem solving?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What is your strategy for your problem solving?
My strategy for problem solving? Well, it depends what the problem is. It might have different answers, but the kind of problems I have right now tend to be, problems about, what I'm going to write, and how is somebody going to get over writer's block, let's say. So my strategy for that literally is setting a 10-minute timer and sitting down and saying, trying to give myself some kind of prompt that hopefully is adjacent to the problem I'm trying to solve, but is not totally on the nose of it. Because if I can come at it through a side door, I'm more likely to get an original and intriguing kind of response from my imagination. So that would be one. And I think with other problems, if they're interpersonal problems, I think the main strategy is simply to try and talk to the person, again, not being reactive, not being blaming. I think blame does not help. My attitude is always, well, what do we do now? How do we fix this, rather than whose fault is this? Whose fault is this? Doesn't matter. It might matter in the long run, because if you know whose fault it is, then you don't want to give them that particular task in the future. But for now, there's no point in worrying about whose fault it is. The main thing is to say, well, what can we do to fix this?
I'm just gonna have to say that there is some comments from our viewers. So, Rashlyn Angkoy, thank you so much for viewing, and Marianne KLM. So thank you so much, Allegra and Patrick, for this wonderful live stream. Learned so much from both of you, and great to see Gmail and PhD once again. Such an inspiration. Thanks so much. And so, our next question. None of us are able to achieve success without some help along the way. Is there a particular person who you are grateful towards who helped get you to where you are?
Well, I would say there are 3. The first one in my career was Andrew Motion, who was the editorial director of Chatto and Windus, which is a very important publishing company, which is where I started my publishing career. And I was his assistant to begin with, and then became an editor and worked on many of the books that he commissioned. And Andrew really did teach me how to be an editor, because he's also a poet. In fact, he became poet laureate of the UK afterward. And he taught me a lot about how a writer works, and how, as an editor, your job is not to be critical. Your job is to help the writer. So you might want to put your finger on something that's not working, but it's not because it's wrong. It just still needs attention. So that he would be the first one. The second one would be Nick Flynn, who I've never met, He is a memoirist who wrote a book called Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, and it's just a great book. And if it wasn't for that book, I don't think I would have ever been able to figure out where my memoir, Love Child, should actually start. So that book was very important to me in writing. And then the third, obviously, is my creative collaborator, James Nave, who is the one who showed me how to come at writing from an imaginative perspective rather than a rational, judgmental perspective. Who's the one who told me to use a 10-minute timer? Who's the one who told me to work with pen and paper? Who's the one who told me that mess is currency? It's not a liability. Mess is great because mess is where the unexpected stuff comes from. So those would be my three. Curiously, all male, but that's accidental.
Well, your success is often a reflection of their guidance and belief in you. So, are you working in any new projects right now, Allegra?
Yes, I am. I'm working on a few. Well, the whole Imaginative Storm project is one big project, because now that we have understood that it's not just for writers, I mean, even if it was just for writers, it would still be a great project, but it's more than that, because what it is a way to explore and expand your imaginative intelligence. And everybody has a huge imaginative intelligence that can draw on everything that ever happened in your life. The question for a lot of people, especially the more rationally focused people, is how to access it. If you think of it as a garden, where are the gates? And there's a front gate, but there are also a whole pile of back gates. So that is a sort of overarching project, is to get the Imaginative Storm method out into the world and encourage more of a valuation of people's imaginative intelligence. Specifically, I'm working on a book about imaginative intelligence, which I'm kind of building up by writing a Substack post it goes out every Monday night, my time. And most of those are about imaginative intelligence now, because I'm really curious about exploring what exactly it is and how it works. And then I'm also working on a sort of sequel to Write What You Don't Know that's specifically focused towards memoir.
Good luck to your projects. For sure, it will be all amazing and many more projects to come to you. Okay. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "Women are like tea bags. We don't know our true strength until we are in hot water." In life, how are you in hot water, Allegra? How are you brewing?
Well, I'm not in hot water right now, fortunately. My worst hot water was as a mother, which is probably, I imagine, will resonate with most women who are mothers, because there is just nothing worse than seeing your kid, not doing well, being unhappy or going down a bad path, or, whatever might be the problem with your kid. And I think every mother goes through it at some point. And I went through it when my son was a teenager. The earlier parts of being a teenager, from about 12 to about 16, were brutal years. And I just stuck with it. I just never stopped loving him and never gave up on him. And now the result is absolutely fantastic. He's good in himself. He knows what his strengths are. He walks on the sunny side of the street, where, before, of course, he was walking under a shadow. And we have the best relationship of a mother and son that I could possibly imagine.
Well, these challenges helps us discover our true strength. By facing these challenges, we can find creative solutions and make a big difference. What is the number one book you can sit and think, "Oh, I wish I read before I started my career"?
Well, to be honest, I wrote it. When I sat down to write Love Child, as I've said, I didn't know how to do it. I thought you should sit down and write 500 words a day, or I thought you should sit down and work for 3 or 4 hours a day, and I thought you should start at the beginning because you should know where the beginning is, which I didn't. And I did not know how to write genuinely creatively, despite the fact that I have, English has always been my strength, and I've always been able to write essays really well, and, got a first in English from Oxford and all that kind of thing. So the book that I wish I had read didn't exist. And that's why I wrote it. And it's called Write What You Don't Know. And there it is.
Write what you don't know. Yes. It seems like a great resource to spark new ideas and boost creativity. Yes. It may also overcome writer's block.
You name it. Overcome your inner critic, overcome writer's block,
Yes.
overcome the finding your voice problem, overcome the, oh, my writing is flat and bland and pompous problem. All of those things. They just kind of disappear. You don't have to like overcome them, actually. They
Mhm.
just kind of stop happening.
Let's imagine that you could meet anyone in the world for a private breakfast. Who would it be and where would you choose to meet?
Well, where is easy because I would just go down the road. I love where I live. I have no desire particularly to be anywhere else. I'd be perfectly happy never to travel again. And I always used to be a really big traveler. So I would meet at Soul Food in Arroyo Seco, and we would have lovely organic, locally sourced produce and so on. And I don't know the name or even how many people are going to be at this breakfast, because this was a really hard question for me to answer. But then I realized the people I would really like to talk to are whoever it was that managed to take the idea of being left-handed from being a problem or a deficiency to being perfectly okay, just a difference. Some people are right-handed, some people are left-handed, no biggie. Because I think that's really relevant to this idea of rational intelligence and imaginative intelligence. And I'm not trying to say, oh, one is left brain and one is right brain. I'm not going there. What I'm saying is that there is, I think, still a value judgment that one is better than the other. That being rational is so important, and your rational intelligence is what's going to solve your problems and everything. And this is just simply not true. And if you read the classic book, Thinking Fast and Slow, that's really all about imaginative intelligence, is what the fast thinking part is. But I think that the public perception is kind of where the public perception was of right-handed and left-handed back in, I don't know what, the 60s or 70s, when left-handed kids were forced, ruler over the knuckles, forced to write with their right hand. So how did that change? And I don't know. It's something I want to research, but I would love to know how the cultural mindset was changed in that. So that's who I would have breakfast with.
That's an amazing answer. It's interesting to learn about how we can create better learning environment for everyone, no matter how they learn best.
Yeah.
And also, last question, can you please give us your favorite life lesson quote?
My dad used to say, rise above it, honey, rise above it. And, that's my imitation of his voice. But I literally hear him in that voice. I almost can't say it without saying it in his voice. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Rise above it. Don't take it personally. Don't be reactive. Be calm. Don't let it get to you. Whatever it is, just rise above it, honey. Rise above it. And I realized when I worked with Jane Goodall, when I was a publisher, she was one of my authors. I worked on a book called Through a Window, which was the story of the second 15 years of Gombe, where she studies chimpanzees. And she is the person I admire more than anybody I've ever met in my life. And what I admired so much about her was that she wasted no energy on what was not important to her. She was the least reactive person I have ever met. She's absolutely a passionate person, a very intelligent person, but wasted no energy on what wasn't important. And that, to me, that's how I would like to be.
Well, it's also a good reminder to stay positive and strong, especially when things get tough. It's also a great lesson for women to remember as we often face unique challenges.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Allegra, for answering my questions. Uh, okay, so here's Patrick.
And it's back to me. Thank you very, very much, Jamil. That was a fantastic debut, speaking with the magnificent Allegra Houston. I have to say, I am so pleased, Allegra, that you chose your own book, because that's a kind of a bloke thing to do. Women are always going to sit there and they'll always choose some other person. It's my best friend wrote this book and it's really nice. But it's like, you went through this life. You were at Chatto and Windus, you were at Wedenfeld and Nicholson, you held senior positions and you were really understood the publishing business. And if you say that's the book that you wish that you'd had, I totally believe you.
Well, thank you.
I mean, that's the book. Because, you know, in terms of write what you don't know, but you really did know the background. And that's the thing that I think is absolutely fabulous. And I totally appreciate that. And look, as we wrap the show up today, it has been absolutely marvelous to have you on the show. Thank you very much to everybody who's participated. We've got a couple of great quotations to round out the day. Theodore M. Hesburgh. The very essence of leadership is that you have to have vision. You can't blow an uncertain trumpet. Although at the same time, I've got to say, actually, Allegra, I love your comment. I mean, that was absolutely magnificent where you were talking about mess, because a friend of mine who's a writer, he was always being criticized by one of his bosses because his boss always used to say, oh, you know, a cluttered desk is a sign of a cluttered mind. And he looked up at this guy one day and just couldn't stand it anymore. And he said, so boss, what is an empty desk a sign of?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I think it's absolutely appropriate, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly where I would have gone with it.
With it, yeah, he waited for like a year
or two.
What is a boring
desk to sign up?
No, exactly. I mean, your desk is totally empty. There's nothing on it. You can find all the tops on your pens. What a loser. There's no creativity there. Anyway, coming back to another very creative man, it seems the old men were quoting today, in Thomas Jefferson, in matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock. Which I suppose in some ways brings us back to debate about known knowns, unknown knowns, unknown unknowns, and so on in many different ways. Allegra, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. Your work is not only something that I think is transforming the landscape to make writing more accessible to everybody. And let's face it, if everybody can feel that they have written a great thing, that's absolutely fantastic. And that is why we're delighted that you were here to give us a PhD, a Positivity Hack Delivered. Beata is going to be watching this, and lots of love to her, and get well soon, Beata. And let me say, this is so exciting to look forward to as a sustainable future. That's it from number 163 of the PhD live stream canon. Thanks to our guest, Allegra Houston. Let me just say thank you very much, Rushlin Ancoy. Great to see you, Rushlin. Hope the cake making's going well. And thank you so much, Marianne Kim. I know you're on holiday at the moment. Such a wonderful live stream, Patrick, Allegra, and Jamil. Can't wait to see more of Jamil co-hosting in future PhDs. You know what, Marianne? Give it another couple of PhDs, and I'm living in hope I'm redundant. You won't have to have any mansplaining whatsoever. Ladies can have PhD back again. Jamil, that was fabulous. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're not going to see you next week, Jamil, are we? Because we've got Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We're taking a week off because we know that nobody is terribly excited at the point in time when there's lots of things to be prepared for the wonders of Thanksgiving. And ladies and gentlemen, to all of those of you who are celebrating in the greatest economy in the world, we wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. I want to say thank you very much, Allegra, for being a magnificent guest. I want to say thanks to our fantastic production team, Fernando, Racy, AJ was loitering in the background, Janella, you did a terrific job today. I know you've all been motivated, as along with Janella, in order to manage to produce this show with not just the brilliant Allegra Houston, but the incredible Jamil Navarroza. The last word goes to you, Jamil.
As always, our positivity quote from Positive Thinking Only, and goes, look for something positive in each day. Even if some days you have to look a little harder. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude, as Maya Angelou says. Today is your day. Hack the future. Hack the positivity. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.